Welcome back to the Docker Basics section of the Getting Started with Docker course. In this lesson, we're going to be installing Docker Desktop. So I'm going to pull up a web browser, and I've gone to hub.docker.com. Now I've logged in as myself. It helps you get started by logging in. And once you do, you get a page that looks similar to this. On the right-hand side, we have Download Docker Desktop. That's what we're looking for. Now, Docker comes in two flavors. It comes in the Community Edition, which is free, and the Enterprise Edition, which is not. We'll be installing the free Community Edition. So click on Download Docker Desktop. And we have this onboarding page that looks like so. You could even follow my URL up here to get this same view directly. And it's going to walk through a few different things. We're not going to go through the whole process, but you could if you want. What this will do is it will install, it's kind of tiny, but install Docker Desktop so we can use the Docker command line interface. There's also a small GUI for some settings. So let's download the Docker Desktop for Windows. Now there is Docker Desktop for Mac, and there's other community engines. If we open this up, you'll see that there's one for Mac, one for AWS, Fedora, CentOS, and more. We're going to select Windows since that's what I'm running. And once this downloads, and it is a significant download, it's about half a gig. But once it downloads, then we'll install it and get it running on our machine. I'm going to pause the video right here so you don't have to watch the download happen. All right, and that's done. Only took a couple minutes. Let's click on this to open, and we'll walk through a setup process. And I got the UAC prompt. Are you sure you want to allow this to install? I do. And it says, hey, do you want to add a shortcut to your desktop? Are you not? And this option right here, use Windows containers instead of Linux containers. And this can be changed after installation. I'm going to use Linux containers. And the reason why is because Linux containers are free, whereas you may get into some licensing issues with Windows containers. Because you do have to look out and pay for the licensing for Windows machines. So I use the Linux containers, but you can swap back and forth depending on what you're doing. So for example, if you had a .NET Framework application, it would have to run in a Windows container because .NET Framework only runs on Windows. And so you have to have a Windows container. But for .NET Core, I can choose a Windows container or a Linux container. So this just makes it easy to choose and use Linux containers for everything so that I can have Linux distributions as well as .NET Core applications side by side, and they all work. So I'll leave this unchecked for now and hit OK. This will install Docker Desktop. And one of the things it's going to do, and this is version 2.0.0.3, note that in case yours is a later version, that's okay. But one of the things it's going to do is going to put an icon in my system tray. And that icon's a little whale, and you'll see it and it will get started. And once it does, you may have to reboot in order to get it to work. Once it does, then you'll see that the Docker Desktop is running and can configure some of those settings, including changing back to Windows containers if you want. Now, since I haven't rebooted, what I did was I hit the Windows key and just typed Docker Desktop. And it went and found it, and I ran the application, which is essentially what will happen on startup normally. And so it's currently starting Docker Desktop. And so once it starts, then we can go and look at a few things. Let's look at settings. Here it's actually just about started, but the settings is loaded. So now I have the ability to start Docker Desktop when you log in. Yep, I want to do that. Automatically check for your updates. Yep. You can choose whether or not to send usage statistics. It is helpful because what it does is it helps the community figure out how to improve Docker Desktop and make it work better. And it should not send any personal information. So don't worry about sensitive data. But if you want to have a little less web traffic, uncheck that. I would leave it checked though, just to help out because this is free. And one of the ways you can help out with a free service is giving them information. You can't complain about not working your machine if you don't send information to them about why it doesn't work. Now, also off screen, I kept it off screen, it also prompted me to log in with my account at hub.docker.com. So I logged in locally on Docker so that I could connect to my hub account. And we'll talk more about what that is and why it is in the future, but I just want to let you know that when that pops up, you don't have to log in, but it is helpful for connecting to your hub account. Now here it's going to say, do you want to allow access to your drives? I'm going to allow access to both drives actually. And what that's going to do is going to allow containers to access my C and D drives if I so choose. So I hit apply to that, and it's going to update the drives that are available. And we can start changing things like memory usage. I'm going to really up the memory usage. Let's give it 8 gig. And the reason why is because I have 32 installed on my machine, and therefore I want to give some extra space, some extra headroom to these not virtual machines, but these containers. So I can, up this a little bit, give us a little more room to play with, and disk image max size is 64 gig. That's probably plenty, but hopefully we'll see. All right. Oops, went off it before I applied it. Let's go ahead and apply. And that's going to restart Docker because I gave it more resources. So it says right down here, Docker is starting. We have to wait for that to be actually started. And so we're going to go through these. Most of these other ones we're not going to touch, but I just want to go through them and kind of point them out what's going on here. So once this starts, then we'll move on to the next one, which network we're not going to touch. So network is just saying, hey, it's an internal virtual switch. Here's the subnet and the IP address range, so that you know that you can talk internally to these things, and they can talk to each other. So we're not going to touch that yet, but that's available to us. Proxies, we're not going to deal with proxies. The daemon we're not going to turn on. So that's a possibility. We're going to leave it alone. Kubernetes, that's a more advanced topic, but what that's for is for clustering and for bringing multiple containers online to orchestrate and talk to each other. That's a more advanced topic. Like I said, we'll get to that probably in another course, but for now, we're going to leave that unchecked. And then finally, we have a reset here. If we want to start from a fresh Docker desktop, we're not going to do that because we just installed. Okay, so that's all the configuration there is for Docker Desktop. Now you could go through the rest of these steps here. They have some simple stuff for cloning down a project. We're going to skip a tutorial and go back here. And what I'm going to do is I am going to, by the way, you may see this version as well. I was actually in my samples. Oh wait, no, I wasn't. When I click here, I go to my samples. So I created samples, but I never actually put anything into it. We might do that later. But this is the main page you should see. Okay, so let's open up PowerShell. I'm going to do the Windows X command and then just select the I, which is Windows PowerShell. And we'll bring it over here like so. And we'll just make sure that Docker is installed and running. Now, it is in the system tray. It does say it's running, but here's one way to check and to see what the version is by saying Docker --version. That says we're on Docker version 18.09.2, and there's the build number. So we're installed, Docker is running, and we're all set to go to start working with Docker. So we're going to leave off there, and now we got the installation complete. We'll come back and actually start with a really quick start, which is our Hello World project. From that, we'll be able to see, kind of break down the different parts, and then build our own version of it. Okay? But for now, we're done with installation. Let's move on to the next lesson where we start our quick start.